Tonight, fighting inflation.
We're finally going to do something on the inflation front in a big way.
Or tax and spending spree.
The Inflation Reduction Act. And in fact, it is the Inflation Increase Act.
Congress locks horns over how to bring down soaring prices. And on the hot seat,
the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
The director of the FBI challenged over political bias inside the Bureau. Plus, the future of policing.
Every day we have gun violence and shooting somewhere and somebody's trying to take someone's life.
Predicting violent crime before it happens. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Lowering inflation by raising taxes. The pushback to a Democratic plan to bring down prices. Welcome to Faith Nation in Washington. I'm Caitlin Burke. The race is on to shore up support for what's known as the Inflation Reduction Act. The $739 billion Democratic spending plan provides major funding for health care and fighting climate change, but critics say it comes at a cost for taxpayers. White House correspondent Abigail Robertson is here with tonight's top story. Abigail, what exactly does the act involve, and why are many in the GOP pushing back?
Well, Caitlin, Republicans claim that this bill is overpriced, will raise taxes, and attack American energy, and it is not expected to receive any Republican support. Now, earlier this week, CBN News spoke with Republican Senator Todd Young about the bill. Take a look.
I was surprised that Democrats this close to a major election, especially since the Democrats are so unpopular right now, would be advocating for a tax increase. I mean, we are literally in a recession that's typically not popular to exacerbate a recession by increasing taxes on rank-and-file Americans.
And Democrats argued this is not a tax increase, with President Biden promising today if you make less than $400,000 a year, you will not pay 1 penny more. So when can we expect a vote, Abigail, and is there a chance it doesn't pass the Senate? Well, Caitlin, the reason we haven't seen a vote yet in the Senate is because Democrats still need to get moderate Senator Kyrsten Sinema on board. Now, she has proposed a few changes she wants made to the bill before she said she'll support it. And one of her concerns is over a new carried interest tax for big investors. Meanwhile, President Biden, though, is urging all Democrats to get on board as soon as possible.
My message to Congress is this: listen to the American people. This is the strongest bill you can pass to lower inflation, continue to cut the deficit, reduce health care costs, tackle the climate crisis, and promote America's energy security.
And Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer announced this afternoon they plan to vote on the motion to proceed to the bill on Saturday afternoon, which would then tee up 20 hours of debate, followed by a vote-a-rama. Now, if and when it passes the Senate, the House would then vote on it. Caitlin? Thanks, Abigail. Moving on to the job market, there's a rise in new unemployment applications. According to Labor Department figures out today, 254,000 people applied for new jobless benefits last week. That's up about 6,000 from the week before. But with about 1.4 million people overall receiving unemployment, jobless claims remain at a 50-year low. The Labor Department released the July jobs report Friday for a broader picture of the American jobs market. Economists predict 250,000 jobs were added to the economy last month. To break this all down for us, let's bring in Mark Hamrick, Washington Bureau Chief and Senior Economic Analyst for Bankrate. Mark, let's start with that July jobs report. What are you anticipating with the latest Labor Department figures tomorrow?
Yes, Caitlin. Well, this jobs report is expected to be, I would say, reasonably solid in the context of what we have tended to see over time, with the expectation being the creation or the restoration of 250,000 jobs on the month. And the expectation is that for a fifth straight month, the unemployment rate will remain at 3.6%. However, there's always a however when we're talking about the economy, that 250,000 jobs would be down sharply from the previous couple of months. And if we were to hit that number or something like it or worse, meaning lower, that would be the smallest number of jobs added since December of 2020. So we know the economy is slowing. The question is how much, and then ultimately how much does that affect the job market in the intermediate term, and obviously in the short term, we're talking about the July jobs picture.
Now, new unemployment applications show a rise this past week. Does that mean we're seeing more layoffs?
Not more per se, Caitlin, but we have seen a rising trajectory of new claims for unemployment benefits at about an 8 or 9 month high. But at 260,000 in the latest week, that is still historically low. And that continuing claims number you referenced, that's basically the total number of individuals getting assistance through traditional state programs. That has been rising slightly, but still historically low. We are anecdotally hearing more reports from companies who are either laying employees off or cutting the number of jobs that they're trying to fill. But that has not led to long lines at that proverbial unemployment office, which now is digital, so there aren't lines anyway. But the point is that we do expect some softening in the job market over the coming, let's say, 6 to 12 months, but not a calamity.
Okay. Now, it would be great if inflation was not a topic we talked with you about every week, but here we are. Is raising taxes a good way to lower costs?
Well, obviously, that's a very polarizing political debate in terms of that specific legislation. But let me try to cut through that without really addressing the specific question, and note that the nonpartisan Committee for a Responsible Budget, now I'm not their spokesperson, but I can just reference what they have said, that this would bring down the federal deficit. And this is an issue that Americans and elected officials have not wanted to tackle, and that is debt and deficit. So the irony here is that there is criticism for paying for a program, which has not been the case for a lot of the spending that we've been seeing here over the past couple of years.
Okay. Now, a recent Bankrate survey shows 34% of Americans have less money in emergency funds than they did last year. With prices so high, how can people prioritize savings?
Well, they have to if they can. And one way to do that is to take advantage or leverage what is still a robust job market. Other indications are that we really have kind of a K-shaped economic downturn right now when we had an expansion coming out of the pandemic. And what I mean by that is the people who are in the higher end of the wealth and income spectrums are still doing pretty well. Middle income and lower are struggling more. And that makes sense because they're in the worst position to fight against inflation. But I think there's still a high number of people, a large percentage of the workforce that is inclined to continue to look for work to improve their wage situation. And that is going to lead to a high degree of mobility, which we actually saw continuing in the latest data from the Labor Department. The quits rate remains pretty high, not quite at the record levels, but we still have a lot of people quitting their jobs to take new employment with 10.7 million job openings.
Right. All right. Mark Hamrick with Bankrate. Thank you as always.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Now, on Capitol Hill, FBI Director Christopher Wray was in the hot seat today. The Senate Judiciary Committee questioning him about oversight of the Bureau. Wray's testimony follows accusations from whistleblowers of political bias and other misconduct. CBN's Tara Mergener has the details.
On Capitol Hill, a Senate showdown with Republicans about how Director Wray will stop alleged departmental political bias. FBI Director Christopher Wray grilled by Republicans before the Senate Judiciary Committee.
The FBI's credibility is on the line as the principles that help found and sustain our great nation.
The committee's ranking members' remarks after penning a letter to the FBI director and Attorney General Merrick Garland about systemic and existential problems within the FBI and DOJ. This following multiple reports of alleged political bias and misconduct.
You'll have to explain to the committee and to the country how you'll manage this mess and how you'll clean house.
Among GOP concerns, bias during investigations into election fraud and handling of the border crisis. Wray also faces scrutiny on the FBI's alleged downplaying of evidence from the investigation into Hunter Biden's financial and foreign business activities. Grassley citing a 2020 FBI intelligence assessment.
The FBI headquarters team falsely labeled Hunter Biden information as you-know-what disinformation.
Saying the American people deserve answers, Republicans also fired off questions on other issues.
We've seen a pattern in which pro-abortion activists have violently targeted over 82 churches,
including a parent's right to speak up at school board meetings.
Figure it out! You've created a specific threat tag directed at parents.
While questions mount, Wray praised the men and women at the Bureau for doing their job well under difficult circumstances.
I continue to be impressed and moved both by what I see firsthand and by what I hear from others about the quality of our workforce.
And promised to protect the whistleblowers.
I condemn in the strongest possible terms any prospect of retaliation against whistleblowers.
Democrats also had questions for Wray, including how the agency is dealing with gun violence and protecting abortion clinics, many praising his performance. In Washington, I'm Tara Mergener, CBN News.
Iran's nuclear escalations. What could come out of the latest round of talks after this? A group of world powers are meeting in Vienna in what's viewed as a last-ditch effort to save nuclear negotiations with Iran. Many on the world stage don't believe the European Union-led talks will salvage a deal. The U.S. Special Envoy for Iran tweeting, quote, "Our expectations are in check, but the United States welcomes EU efforts and is prepared for a good faith attempt to reach a deal. It will shortly be clear if Iran is prepared for the same." Here with us now is Andrea Stricker, the Non-Proliferation and Biodefense Program Deputy Director at Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Andrea, thanks for joining us. As nuclear talks restart yet again, is a deal nearly irrelevant at this point?
Well, thank you for having me. I think the deal is expiring already. It's 7 years into this 15-year accord. And as the years go by, Iran can actually do more with its uranium enrichment program. It's already made significant advances while doing these talks. For 16 months, it's been dragging out the negotiations, all while making these significant enhancements to its atomic program. And I think these are capabilities that negotiators can't ignore. The nuclear deal will not be able to put all of this back in the box. And it slowly sunsets in the coming years, all while Iran can fortify its economy with billions of dollars in sanctions relief.
So you mentioned the advancements that Iran has already made. How close do you think they are to a bomb?
Well, we estimate that they have enough enriched uranium overall to make at least 5 nuclear weapons. That would require further weaponization. And estimates are that it could take 6 months for them to be able to weaponize the material. It would require an underground test to demonstrate this, but we think within 6 months it could be done. Estimates to put it on a missile are much longer, 1 to 2 years, but we don't want to allow Iran to continue making advancements that we won't be able to stop if it gets closer and closer to this threshold.
You and your colleagues at FDD have developed a timeline detailing how Iran has exploited America to escalate its nuclear program. What significant moves has the regime made under President Biden?
Well, every time they start a new round of negotiations, it seems that Iran takes another step forward. So when it first started the talks in April 2021, it started making 60% enriched uranium, which is the highest level that Iran has ever achieved. And that is technically a very short step from 90% or weapons grade. It's made uranium metal under President Biden's watch. So that's a weaponization relevant material that you use in a nuclear core. And it has continued to stockpile enriched uranium while deploying thousands, hundreds of advanced centrifuges at underground facilities. And it's reduced IAEA or UN nuclear watchdog monitoring significantly. So we have fewer eyes on what they're doing and limited visibility if they do go for nuclear weapons.
Okay. Now, the U.S. has imposed some additional sanctions. Why don't they seem to be slowing down Iran's nuclear progress?
Well, the U.S. sanctions are finally catching up just a little bit, but the main problem is that they haven't been enforcing existing sanctions on Iran's ability to export oil. It's selling oil to China, the United Arab Emirates, to Syria, and it's doing so right out in the open on tankers that you can even track via satellite. So it's able to earn billions. This enables the regime to avoid making hard choices and making a deal. And now they likely probably want to continue fortifying their economy and not go back into this nuclear accord.
All right, Andrea Stricker with Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
American Crime Wave, the data-driven way to stop criminals before they act. Next on Faith Nation.
Region's first ROTC graduate student.
Violence in the U.S. continues on an upward trend in 2022. And though you may hear a lot about cities like New York and Chicago, they don't even land in the top 10 for the most murders per capita so far this year. According to police data of large cities, New Orleans leads the list with a murder rate of 36.8 per 100,000 people. Baltimore is next with 29.1, and Birmingham, Alabama comes in at number 3 with a murder rate of 28. Rounding out the top 5, St. Louis and Milwaukee. Meanwhile, police departments are trying to predict violence before it happens, using science-driven data to forecast when and where the next crime wave could take place. It's called crime mapping, and in one city, it's credited for a 27% reduction in the number of shooting victims. Brody Carter explains.
I'm here in Portsmouth, Virginia, which, as you can see, has beautiful waterfront views. It overlooks one of the oldest naval shipyards in the United States. It also has one of the highest murder rates throughout the nation, higher than Chicago and Washington, D.C. So how do smaller communities that have limited resources fight rising crime rates?
Every day we have gun violence and shooting somewhere and somebody's trying to take someone's life.
The U.S. murder rate started surging during the COVID pandemic and sits at its highest level in nearly 2 decades.
Actually, it hits home for me. My father was killed when I was 2 years old due to gun violence. So I was raised by women, and I'm very passionate about gun violence and trying to eradicate this senseless crime.
Reverend Barry R. Randall, also known as the People's Pastor here, leads Sunday service at the All People Cultural Life Church. The locals lovingly call the city P-Town. However, the charm is overshadowed by its reputation for violence. Murder in the city has become such a problem, the state is giving it $500,000 to try and stop it. The question is, how do they plan to use it?
We've been asked a lot of questions about what is our strategy, what are we going to do, and how are we going to address crime. Point blank, I'm not going to say that. When you're playing football, you don't tell the other team your next move.
It's a cryptic approach to crime that didn't last long. After serving the city only 10 months, former Chief of Police Renato Prince was fired shortly after the 4th of July for a, quote, breach of trust. Different departments have different strategies. Not 20 miles away in Virginia Beach, Chief Paul Newdigate believes his department has a secret weapon to stop rising crime and gun violence: data.
Instead of just throwing money at officers, maybe that money should go to help them build up an analytical services unit, help them develop their analytical product so the officers that they do have can be extremely focused in their efforts.
That's why the department is reinvesting in a law enforcement tool that's been around some 20 years, called crime mapping. It uses historical data to build a heat map of when and where crimes might happen in the future. Think of a farmer's almanac for crime prevention, where police are able to forecast crime before it even happens.
But it's incredibly telling because crime is historical and it can be cyclical. And if it's happening year over year at the same time, it allows us to develop strategies and try to impact it.
Some of the data is made public in the weekly analysis for Virginia Beach Engagement and Strategies, or WAVES. While there are concerns that data could be biased towards people of color, Chief Newdigate attributes crime mapping to this year's 27% reduction in the number of shooting victims.
It's what the community is telling me. It's who is a victim of the community. And are there disparities? Absolutely. We know that there are disparities in that data. A large amount of our victims of violent crime are minorities.
Another tool Virginia Beach Police uses hides on the city's rooftops. It's called ShotSpotter. Technology alerting police precisely to the location where gunshots are fired.
I would say it probably has about a 95% success rate. It leads to a confirmed activation. That 95% of the time, we are responding there and we're finding either shell casings, sometimes we're making an arrest, or we're finding witnesses that said, yeah, I saw this and here was some gunfire.
While both crime mapping and ShotSpotter have been around for years, not all departments take advantage of those resources. Back in the city of Portsmouth, the local hospital is footing the city's bill to purchase ShotSpotter, a signal of hope for its citizens who are still desperate to find an answer to the violence.
What people need to know about Portsmouth, that Portsmouth has potential, but we have to get the right people in office. Voting is very positive.
Brody Carter, CBN News.
Coming up, jumping for charity. One man's attempt at a record-breaking birthday. Next.
Young people, millennials, are flocking to church.
It's not an exaggeration to say that we love to meet them and that we love to know their stories.
Finally tonight, a daring birthday goal recently led one Pennsylvania man to jump out of a plane more than a few times. Skydiving instructor Chris Howard wanted to mark his 40th birthday in a big way by breaking the state record of 40 skydives in a day. Let's just say he blew that figure out of the water with a record-shattering 101 dives between sunrise and sunset. Not only did Howard achieve that accomplishment in celebration of his birthday, he also raised money for charity. Congratulations, Chris. You know, I think for my birthday, I am going to keep my feet on the ground. That's going to do it for Faith Nation. See you tomorrow.